Welcome. This is Soren with Wisdom 2.0. I'm very excited to introduce you to our next guest in the series. This next interview is with David Simas. David served as the Director of Opinion Research for President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012. Following the re-election, he went on to serve as Assistant to the President, and he's currently CEO of the Obama Foundation. It's a real joy to be able to interview David. In this interview, we talk some about the research he did, listening to voters ahead of the election and how he learned about mindfulness, both through that and through his own meditation practice. So please enjoy this interview with David Simas.
As I was thinking about this discussion we're going to have in that moment of when I began, there was probably a deeply utilitarian, selfish, self-help, job-related piece of it that was very urgent.
For the first time, a part of you was like, I need more relaxation and it'll help me be a better worker. Is that what you're saying? Am I understanding you right?
Yeah. And I'm very comfortable getting into it because when you think about what I was doing on a nightly basis, or every other night usually, I would have to listen to first 8 men, then 8 women, sometimes 4 of those groups. And I was required to do the job well, to put my emotion, my judgment, my view of what they were saying out. By definition,
you were part of
focus groups.
Focus groups, yeah.
And these were just voters, right? And the purpose of the groups was to get at underlying sentiment, underlying themes, to not just hear what they were saying, but to try to get under the hood and be open to the why they were saying it. Because you can always regurgitate, well, person A said this, this, and that. But all right, what's the connective tissue underneath not just what Soren is saying, but what Haley is saying that sounds similar to it? So in order then to read out and to then present to the rest of the team the essence, I needed to get out of my head.
Wow.
I needed to have a facility of saying, okay, this person is making me furious. How could they possibly think that? They're an idiot, or they're a racist, or they may be all that stuff. Unhelpful.
Yeah.
And so it was this kind of interesting thing where, as a function of doing my job best, I needed to be present in a moment by moment by moment, non-judgmental way, monitoring the internal experience that I was having and the external experience. And you do that, Jesus, how many nights? 600 nights.
Wow.
And each night, 3 to 4 to 5 hours.
Wow.
It's only come to me recently that essentially those were like 4 and 5 hour meditation sessions.
Wow.
I'm not talking.
Wow.
You're taking it all in. You're writing. You're taking notes. But as soon as the judgment arises, right, that's going to come afterwards. But in that moment, because then you begin to cloud, you begin to editorialize in a way that takes away the truth. Or as much of the truth as you can see. And it was, what a backwards way to get into mindfulness.
I think one of the definitions of insight meditation or Vipassana meditation is to see clearly. And I think it's almost impossible to see clearly if we're not also seeing the stories and the overlay that we put onto an experience. And so it sounds like what you were practicing was like, I'm going to actually listen, and I'm going to be conscious or as mindful as I can be of whatever my reaction is that doesn't actually let me receive this person. And I think that's such a gift in my life when there's somebody who's with me And I can tell that they are conscious of whatever story they might be putting on top of me, and they can just kind of meet me where I am. And we've both been around a lot of kind of well-known famous people. You know, one of the most painful, isolating things is to be seen as an image and as a story.
Yes.
And how few people can kind of be aware that the story that they're telling about themselves, and there's an actual human being right here that I can meet with. So when you talk about that, I talk about, you know, just that power of actually meeting and being able to see, and how much we get caught in the negative, but we also can get caught in the positive, right? Like
Yes.
when I've worked with people who get a lot of attention, at the end of the day, they'll feel really lonely at times. So like, nobody actually saw me, you know,
Yeah.
they're understanding, but there's that sense of like, how do we see clearly? And so it makes total sense to me that you're introduced to meditation was like, wow, this whole exploration of how do I see clearly another? And then of
Yes.
course, at some point it's like, how do I see clearly myself?
Right. Because in some ways for me it was like beginning externally
Yeah.
in a deeper way before then I can pivot and right. And even though I was on the cushion as much as I could be, um, in a very novice beginner without a teacher kind of way, and going online and, oh, let me listen to this guided meditation, and I can't sit for more than a minute because thoughts are just raging and I'm not doing this right and I'm not good at it, etc. But you then for that period of time put me behind the mirror.
Hmm.
And Soren, there was it was after one of the shootings, and the shootings were, excuse me.
The school shootings, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the school shootings were always the worst.
Mhm.
I'm a parent. Most of my colleagues are parents, were parents. Certainly, the president, Mrs. Obama, with their two daughters, are parents. And so it's raw. And in our mind, the clarity of what is right and what is wrong is unassailable.
Mhm.
And how could anyone not be for X?
Yeah.
And if they're not for X, then you begin to construct different theories about who they are and judgments about the type of person and what they don't care about. Right.
Yeah.
So I forget where, but it was uh, in a community where we had brought together a number of people who were lifelong gun owners and parents
Mm.
of children in the wake of one of this, just to hear essentially how they were processing what was going on, and keeping judgment subdued, not suppressing it,
Mhm.
but in those moments where someone would say something that I was just so viscerally against, in feeling the self-righteousness
Mhm.
because of the rawness of the moment, then I stopped listening.
Mhm.
At that moment, I'm remembering this vividly. I begin to judge and to in my mind call names and, well, these are the wrong people. This is an aberration, right? And then at that moment to just stop and say, literally, David, stop it. And then all of a sudden, when you create that space, there's a woman. You close my eyes and I can see her vividly. Where I'm paraphrasing Soren, where essentially she said, "Of course, I believe everyone should have a background check before they buy a firearm. Of course, that's just the right thing to do. But my grandfather passed on a rifle to my dad. My dad passed on a rifle to me and to my brothers and my sisters.
Mhm.
And ever since we were little, we were taught safety and the right way to use this weapon. And what bothers me, her words, not mine, but all these folks in cities and these nice suburbs, the closest home to mine is about a mile and a half.
Mhm.
And so when I call the police,
Mhm.
when are they going to arrive? And I believe in in outdoors, in being a sportsman. Her words, not mine. And whenever I hear these folks in Washington talk about gun, right? None of those people own firearms. None of these people are from places where I'm at and from. None of them understand my family and our traditions in the safety. And so I don't trust them to stop at just a background check, right?
Wow.
Now I'm seeing and I'm hearing the words of this woman speaking from truth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know her motives. I don't know her intentions. I don't know her family history. I have no idea who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so ready immediately in a feeling of justified rage and self-righteousness to condemn her without knowing more. And so night after night after night after night after night of this type of listening,
Wow.
to understand, in some ways was the core of my practice, and it was rich, and it's one of the things that I miss deeply, is just the ability to, sit behind that mirror, not be seen, and just to have an insight and a view into the lives of people, in a way that was a gift. It was a real gift. God, I miss that part.
Well, when I see you with people now, just to give you some feedback, it's amazing the presence that you bring to people. So I think there is something about that experience of watching however many hours of deep listening that, at least for me, watching you with people continues. I remember being at when you had first come to Silicon Valley for some meetings, and we're standing in line. I'm just getting my food from the server and hurrying through. And you're like making a connection with the server and like, sir, thank you so much. Sir, where are you from? And just like, and I was like, wow, I just totally went right on by that line. And so I do feel like I've learned a lot from you in terms of stopping, like value each person, like honor each person's role, whatever their role is. So for me, I see it. And I'm sure that all those hard-earned hours, behind the screen, continues to live through you, at least from my perspective, and you've impacted me in terms of that. I've taken that on.
Thank you. Thank you. It's one of my, when you mentioned that, one of the things that that really and especially when I was still in the White House, and one of the things that you see when you have the privilege of being able to see it is the president of the United States can never go in through the front door of a building. Mm-hmm. It's rare. And so you're in the vehicle, they call it the beast, and you go into the loading dock in the basement, the garbage area of a hotel. Mm-hmm. And you get out of the car and there are literally the garbage bins everywhere. And you go into the service elevator. And in the service elevator, it opens up, and you can imagine, Soren, it's like just the metallic floor and buttons, and it's clanging, and there's a person, usually a person of color. And every single time, without fail, no cameras present, the president of the United States. Who are you? Tell me a little bit about yourself, and would have this conversation with this man or woman up until usually then the kitchen area. When you get up to the kitchen area, before you go to the green room, he is walking through, and once again, mostly people of color, who are the food preps and the cooks and the cleaners, who are all cordoned off, but they see the president of the United States. And every single time, no cameras, no one's watching. It's like no benefit. Every time, beeline over to them, says hello to the group, has them all, because he can't spend quality time with each one of them, has them all gather for a group picture.
Mm.
And Soren, the joy on the faces of these men and women who are working
Yeah.
in a kitchen out of the way and will never be seen
Mm-hmm.
by the folks who paid God knows what
Mm-hmm.
to be in attendance for the President of the United States, to be seen by him
Mm-hmm.
and to smile for that picture that then each one of them will receive a couple of weeks after.
Mm-hmm.
There was a modeling of behavior that for me is mindful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That every single person, whether you are the Queen of England, Her
Mm-hmm.
Majesty, or the man or woman, has an essence, has a dignity, has a worth, and are seen and should be seen in a way that is respectful and dignified. That's like just the essence,
That's
right?
beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah,
There was
every time.
I was listening to Oprah did an interview a while back ago. I think it was with Sheryl Sandberg, and Oprah had said, I've interviewed mass murderers who've killed like 10, 20 people. I've interviewed Beyonce and, all these people and very famous people. And she said, everybody asks me the same thing after interview, no matter mass murder. And the same thing is, was I okay? And there's some part of us, right? That's whether we're on the top or the bottom, or where it's like, am I all right? And I think, as I look at what true leadership is that kind of way of letting people know that they're okay and that they're acceptable and that their role is honorable. And to me, that's such a mindful leader, and that even the people who have success are all looking to, sometimes they're also looking to just be like, what, you're good. You don't need to do anything more. And I love that expression of mindfulness actually came with you more at both seeing President Obama, but also something in you began to kind of resonate, right? Wow, there is this attentiveness to life. And there's this way of perceiving what's in my world that a lot of people would have just walked right on by, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what happens with most presidents, but my guess is a lot of people would just kind of go stroll on by. And I can see how that then inspired in you more interest, even though you weren't sure the path. And I'd love to kind of hear, if you will, how you decided, like, because meditation is not easy. There's not a lot of it's not something that comes with a lot of at least early on, like amazing insights and experiences. So how did you kind of take this initial interest in mindfulness and decide, what, I'm going to make time for this? Of the 10,000 things I could be making time for, like, I'm going to prioritize this in my life. Do you remember that decision? Or was that something that it would say, like, it started to control you, or it started to speak to you? Because I think a lot of people get touched, but then I feel like you actually made a conscious effort to say, this is something I'm going to develop in my life.
So, and I think it was more the latter, where, I remember vividly, and most people have imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a healthy and Olympic-sized dose of imposter syndrome. Walking into that building,
Into the White House.
Into the White House. And the same thing followed me then onto the campaign to do something that I had never done before professionally. And so the feeling of doubt, the feeling of, should I be doing this? Am I the right person to be doing this? God knows there are probably a million people who are better at doing this. And so the level of stress that then would manifest itself in, okay, I need to be in at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and I need to leave at 9:30 or 10 because I need to make up for it. And then that begins to spiral just in terms of the way you show up. So now you're exhausted,
Mm-hmm.
on top of a feeling of not deserving
Mm-hmm.
to be there, in a way that then even when you're working, um, the moments of stress, the moments of anxiety, you can become short with people. You can become um, judgy in a way that isn't helpful and doesn't allow you to do your job the right way. And so I think what I would see and what I did see is that practice gave me a toolkit
Mm.
on a daily basis to say, okay, I'm going into this meeting right now, and this meeting has the potential to be very stressful. I'm going to go into a meeting with people that I don't agree with whom I've had a bad experience. And so I have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so the time on the cushion then set me up for this kind of real life practice on a day-to-day basis in a way that became a need
Mm.
for me. It allowed me to deal with those feelings that I was wrestling with, but also, I think, to do my job better. Not the part of the job that was listening to
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of people throughout the country, but then the work on a day-to-day basis. And so, and every job has its stresses.
Mm-hmm.
But in the White House, you have your plan
Mm-hmm.
for the day, and you have your senior staff meeting, and everybody is prepared. You know what you're working on, and then something happens. I
Mm-hmm.
remember vividly, in the first year, I think, I was working for David Axelrod, who was a senior advisor to the president in the first term. And I was giving him a briefing on some piece of legislation and some of the research that we had done. And he looked at me and essentially he said, "Here's what my schedule is for the day. I've got a meeting on Iraq. I've got a meeting on the auto bailout. I've got a meeting on some healthcare issue that's happening. I've got a meeting on this, and the other thing." And at that moment, when he was saying that, the chief of staff to the president at the time, Rahm Emanuel, came in and said, "We have to evacuate Fargo." And Axelrod's like, "Why do we need to evacuate Fargo?" And he's like, "Because there's flooding and all this needs to happen." And so whatever plan that you have at the beginning of the day, even to deal with things that are, in many instances, life and death situations, there isn't an hour that doesn't go by where a curveball is thrown at you that requires your immediate focused attention at that moment to be of service to millions upon millions of people, day after day, week after week,
Wow.
month after month, year after year. And so for me, finding this reservoir of well-being that gave me a momentary time of stillness and calmness to kind of work out the judgments, to work out the delusions, to work out the angers and the fears, to work out ways to think about how to be present for those stressful moments, to do my job best, to serve, as the president reminded us every single day, to serve the American people. That's the way, Soren, where I really began to dig into the practice on a personal level.
It's interesting. There's an image that sometimes meditation teachers show where it's like, this is being aware of thought, and then this is thinking, and so it's going to cross. It's our relationship to what is happening. And it feels like you started to be able to kind of like slow down enough that you could see things without necessarily getting too caught up in the moment, but addressing the moment as it needs to be addressed. And could imagine without that, how would one survive such a situation? So it makes a lot of sense to me that as a survival tool for such a time. But again, it still takes commitment, and it takes a focus. And I'm curious, like, how do you see when you tell somebody, "Oh, I practice mindfulness," or I'm mindfulness interested. What's your working definition? John Kabat-Zinn has his own working definition. How do you find yourself making sense to it to yourself or to others?
Yeah.
Do you
I
have a way that it expresses itself?
Yes, it's my mind is with me 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't develop a good relationship with it, then my mind will make choices for me.
Okay.
And so for me, mindfulness is essentially about a mind training.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that assessment, in that being in a moment to moment, non judgmental way, you begin to develop that relationship with your mind
Mm-hmm.
in a way that then creates the space for choice.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to the practice, and to this day, because God knows I fail a lot. But when anger arises, when anxiety arises, when a thought arises, when an emotion arises, do I fuse with it,
Mm-hmm.
in which I've lost control? Do I suppress it or fight it, which will give me a momentary relief, but I know that it's going to come back twice as strong at some point, at which moment I will fuse with it?
Yeah.
Or do I create that space that then gives me the choice? It's the right. I was mentioning to you, Soren, how John Kabat-Zinn was kind enough to, after I asked him to send me a reading list for the summer on deepening my conceptual understanding of meditation, specifically in mindfulness. I came across the 12 factors of dependent origination. And I kept on coming back to, and I keep on coming back to the space between contact and feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then between feeling and craving, and to try to disaggregate those three experiential elements. And if I can create first that little space to make the choice between, I have now, that feeling has arisen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, but now I have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
This is in some ways, that's the battleground.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, I'm certainly not proficient enough, nor will I probably ever be in this lifetime, to have the battle be between contact and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that space, knowing that your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your perceptions, your feelings, your judgments are there constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's the training. And look, if people are going to spend half an hour in the gym,
Yeah.
half an hour on the Peloton bike, important, because you're with your body 24/7. But what is the similar activity, the similar type of training for your mind? And for me, that's been my mindfulness meditation practice, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful. It makes a ton of sense. It reminds me of I like to quote Eckhart Tolle sometimes, but Eckhart Tolle had said once, he's like, we're only responsible for one thing, the state of our consciousness at any given moment in time.
Yes.
How?
Right. How?
Right. Go ahead.
How you treat me is your choice. How I react
Mm-hmm.
is my choice. Right. You control that. I control my reaction. And how many instances where someone is either angry or you're in a tense situation, and you know that if you react with that type of anger or tension, you are literally adding more wood to the fire.
Yeah.
And what happens in that moment where, rather than being fused with that emotion and losing control, that moment you step back, and in a deep state of curiosity, you basically try to understand. You immediately see, in most instances,
Yeah.
you've taken the oxygen away from the fire, and it may not go away immediately,
Yeah.
but it lays the necessary predicate then to deepen a relationship, both in the short term, but then in the long term. So yeah, that um, that expression by Eckhart Tolle makes
A hard
total
one. I
sense
hate
to me.
it. I hate it. It's
Yeah.
true. I do. I hate it. It's true. I'm like, please make something else true. It's not my responsibility. And yet inside, I'm like, hell, shit, damn
Right.
it.
Yes.
There is some truth to that. And it doesn't mean not to protest. It doesn't mean not to yell and do all of our actions. And yet there is that, like, what is my state? What's the state of consciousness I'm bringing to this situation, which is what I hear you doing, right? Like, there's an action that needs to take place, but what's the state of consciousness that's inspiring that action? And if I'm not aware of that, I very possibly could become, in my own thinking that I'm solving something, I could actually be creating some of the same thing I think I'm solving. And so I as much as I hate it and I love it, and I feel like that's the work. Yeah.
It's the beauty of one of the last public appearances that John Lewis
Mm.
made was actually a webinar with Barack Obama, John Lewis, and Brian Stevenson.
Oh, wow. Just Mercy,
It,
Brian Stevenson. Yeah. Great.
yeah. And the discussion was about protest and movement in health.
Mm.
And someone like John Lewis, where activism and protest and organizing, but from a place of love
Mm-hmm.
and compassion,
Mm.
deeply strategic, but also rooted in a place of values. The strategic part of it, which was the central kind of ethos around nonviolent resistance, was that you took the fuel away from the fire.
Yeah.
In what he knew and Dr. King knew and others knew in the civil rights era was that the images on television that night in Nebraska, in Iowa, in rural Massachusetts, in urban Washington state, and everywhere else, the images of African American protesters on a bridge being nonviolent and being exposed to that,
Yeah.
Brought out a different feeling among the people at home. It was like a way to generate and animate the underlying feelings of compassion.
Yeah.
That this is completely wrong and unjust, and I need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so his references to love and to compassion in a Gandhi-esque also kind of way is one of the ultimate expressions of strength and power in a completely paradoxical way that turns the notions of strength and power on its head for some.
Yeah.
Right? And when you think about the protests in the wake of George Floyd, Soren, the beautiful images of millions of people of all races, of all religions
And police officers joining sometimes and holding hands.
Yes, right. That expression of this is wrong. It didn't happen to me, but it could happen to me or someone like me, or even if it couldn't happen because of systemic racism, or it's unlikely to happen to someone like me or like you. This is not who we are. Yeah. There's that element of compassion that meets the where anger can turn to hatred.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
It is super powerful. And I'm wondering, so just to date this conversation, we're a little less than 100 days before the next 2020 election. And if I have to look ahead, my guess is the next couple months are going to be extremely negative. and extremely polarizing, if I had to guess. What are your thoughts on, as a country, beginning to navigate this terrain towards one that has a greater sense of we as a human, as a nation, and kind of what our shared commonalities are, and how we can discuss or begin to address the differences, not from a place of this person is wrong, but from a place of actually listening and also making sure our voices is heard. And I get the sense that there's going to be a pressure cooker. I could be wrong, but I sense that we're going to have a lot of really strong lessons coming forward. And I'm just curious your thoughts as you see our nation go through this time, both with the protests, with COVID, with an election arising. How do you see this? How do you kind of, what keeps you up at night, or what concerns you? What do you think is kind of medicine? What's our medicine, or what's our healing in this time?
The
big question, I know, and do your best.
I'll give it a try. On the morning of November 4th, there will be 60 to 70 million people who will wake up and think that the republic is lost to them. Mm-hmm. That feeling, that crescendo is going to build, and it's going to build, and it's going to build. And on the night of November 3rd, assuming that there will be a clear winner, which may or may not be the case just because of vote by mail and in a pandemic, the raw intensity will be real. Yeah. And so it is important, I think, first, for no matter who you vote for, to have an awareness of that feeling that you will have if your candidate loses, is a feeling that will be felt by, let's not say half the country, but by tens upon tens upon tens of millions of people. The acknowledgement of that is important. And an acknowledgement that can't be my side won, therefore you lost. Mm-hmm. It's one of the unfortunate but real things just about the way elections are prosecuted in the United States, where it's my team and your team, and there's a sport element to who's up and who's down, the latest polls, the movement in the numbers, what does it look like here, what's the horse race there, and it's the piece that just consumes people to the point where you really don't even talk about it, and it's really not covered in terms of policy. And in defense of media, and I've seen the statistics on this, because now you can follow it online just in terms of the way people click. Talk about how many clicks a poll-based story received versus a deep dive into the differences in housing policy between the Republican and the Democratic candidate. It's not close. Mm-hmm. It's not close. And so the first thing is the acknowledgement that for everyone, mm-hmm. that let's say half the country is going to be some angry, some despondent, some sad, but feeling a loss, a sense of aggrievement. So that's the first thing. The second thing that is really important, I think, is when you talk about either the candidates or their supporters, let's not fuse the policy decisions they're making as necessarily as a character trait that they have. Mm-hmm. The discussion in the room for democracy to flourish is always better if we're saying, I believe candidate X has really bad policies, and here's why. I believe that the outcomes of these policies will be harmful or not be as beneficial as these policies. That's a different mm-hmm. sentiment. That's a different feeling than that candidate is bad, and that candidate wants to harm or hurt these people.
Mm-hmm.
One is an implication about the intent, about the motives and the character of a person. The other is about, I don't know their motive. I don't know their intent. I don't know their view and their judgment of things. The best assessment I have is that if they do what they say they're going to do, there are going to be these policy outcomes that I stand against.
Yeah.
Completely different
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what that generates and how that is received by people.
And liberals
And
can be
this,
guilty of that as conservatives in my that goes across political domains for sure.
yes, yes, right. It's you can say something is bad. You can say that an outcome is terrible, that it's evil, that someone has been harmed and someone has been hurt. That is the right way to engage. But then to say that, therefore, anyone who supports X, Y, or Z, anyone is this character or that character or
Yeah.
that character. Because once you do that, where do you go the day after? Where do you go? Now, there's a difference between before you heal, you have to see, and you have to see clearly, and you have to see in as an objective way as possible. But what creates the greatest possibility for that objective seeing and clarity? Keeping open the space, the idea that someone doesn't have bad intent, doesn't have bad motives, to try to understand where they're coming from. Option A, that's door one. Or door two, by saying that someone is venal and deluded and bad. That's door two, or option B. I've already lost the structure of the argument, but it falls back to, again, one of the reasons why mindfulness for me has been very important.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say, especially in an I win, you lose dynamic, which is an election by definition.
Yeah.
And you work yourself up to a frenzy that not just is my candidate better, but you and your candidate are terrible. Okay, fine. You win. Now what? How do we govern?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a little bit of the book we were speaking to before we started called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, where it says the expert has few options, the beginner has many. And it kind of comes into that, like, what do I don't know about this? Like, versus like, oh, I know who they all are. And then there's another door or option, which is to kind of come at with curiosity, which is kind of what I hear. It's like, wow, I don't know what the motives are for these people. How can I learn? And it does feel like we're in a situation now that's almost asking us to do like a somewhat heroic jump towards curiosity and towards non-division, even when division is all around us. And I hear you speaking to that heroic jump, which is kind of essential potentially to what makes a democracy work. And while it's so appealing to maybe take on those judgments, our great leaders of the past, if they've shown us anything, is that there's another way.
Yeah. And to what end? The end of the ends that we're trying to achieve aren't about just winning an election.
Yeah.
The ends are about the well-being of our countrymen and countrywomen, the well-being of all people.
Yeah.
And if you begin with that and get out of just the challenge, if my side wins, everything will be better.
Yeah.
Right. It's now going back to meditation. There's a delusion there. There's this craving that all of a sudden you are setting yourself up for deep disappointment when all of a sudden it doesn't work that way, because we are a nation of 330 million human beings who have elected leaders in Washington and in city halls and in state capitals, who have to navigate in a pluralistic democracy the fact that you can put 10 people in a room who are going to have 10 different ideas about what should be done. And if you set up a dynamic in a situation where essentially it is my idea is the best and all of you are wrong, then the tribalism is going to break out.
Yeah.
If you set it up where I am interested and know that you and I may be on opposite sides today on this, but we will be on the same side tomorrow on that, and it's a continuous journey rather than the election decides everything. That's a different mindset. There's some work that people have been doing on questions of structure are really interesting around the way campaigns are prosecuted, but campaigns are prosecuted as a function of the system of elections and what they look like. So if you have each party doing their own primary, and you know that turnout in a primary, let's assume, is 20 to 30%, and the only people who are voting in the primaries are the people who are most certain of the rectitude of their party's worldview, then all of a sudden, whoever emerges from either of the primaries is going to represent a small segment of that population in a more partisan one. So what is the general election going to look like? Essentially, this binary, two very different worlds with no meeting in the middle. And it becomes a zero-sum game where the tactics then are not about persuading the majority that my idea is best, but that the other man or woman is bad. Which then sends a signal to the 48 or 49% who vote for the losing candidate that somehow they're also bad. And it moves aside. So one of the interesting ideas, and there are tests of this in different states in different ways, but imagine rather than just partisan primaries in California, in Washington state, essentially you have one nonpartisan primary. But rather than just the top two going to the general election, imagine if the top five went. Oh, all of a sudden, the gaming out that each campaign will do in the general is very different. So now what if the general election is something that they've done in Maine, which is you're not just voting for me against you, you're ranked order voting. And so my first choice is Soren. My second choice is David. My third choice is Haley. My fourth choice is John. My fifth choice is Diego. The campaign strategy changes now. Because in some ways, you want to be everyone's second choice. or be an acceptable second choice after you've locked in your 10 or 15 or 20%. That changes the way you talk about your opponents and their voters. The coalition building and the approach is very, very different. And so, Soren, you and I have spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, obviously. And so this analogy may not be the best, but it's one that's resonant to me. What is the operating system? That then will take what is innate in all of us and actually express the better virtues. Rather than the me against you, us against them, zero sum, I win, you lose dynamic, right? Because the campaigns and the elections are but an expression of what each of us have innately in all of us. And so, yes, there are things that we should all do in terms of the way we think about the opposing candidate and the supporters. But then there are, and I'm not saying those two are the right ideas, I haven't spent, but just for us to broadly think about what the operating system of elections can be in a way that gets us out of the dualistic I win, you lose mindset that at the end of the day is harmful right now to democracy, if that makes sense.
It reminds me this quote from Gandhi that I heard. Gandhi said, I have three enemies. The enemies. First is the British, who should not be here, and they're ruling us in our harmful ways. My second is the Indian people, who I cannot get to organize and do what I want to do. And the third is this guy, or the last is this guy named Mahatma Gandhi, who continues to disappoint me. And so there's this way in which I feel like we can kind of hold it all. We can take personal responsibility, and then we can also see that like we're kind of also in this larger human family. And I feel like that is what you're speaking to. And there's a way of honoring the differences, and then there's a way of honoring the similarities. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. And I kind of feel like with my friends most of my friends are liberal, but most of my friends, like there's this emphasis, which I'm, let's get a new president, let's get a new leadership, totally get it. And yet the same problems will exist. And so how do we also become more of that sense of a human American family, which, I feel like I grew up in rural West Texas. Like I can't those are my people. Like, they fed me, they took care of me, they mentored me. Like they're mainly all conservatives. Like I know that in my system. And so, we can talk about this long, but I'm excited at what is possible, even though right now it doesn't feel like there's much of a path through, but I'm excited. And I really appreciate you talking about it as continuing specifically in your particular role as head of the Obama Foundation, that you can do your work in multiple ways, but really that it's about serving humanity. And so I really appreciate you speaking to that voice, because I feel like we need as many of us as possible speaking to what's common in us and fighting. And at the same time, fighting for the causes that we believe.
For what you believe in. Yes.
Yeah. Both.
Yeah. And right. It's one of the things that you'll, when I do talk about mindfulness, sometimes there is the misconception and the critique that it draws you away from the world, that you become so focused on what's happening internally that you detach.
Yeah.
And Soren, I think that's just upside down. That's you. The only way you can begin to relieve suffering and make your world better is by beginning to do that internal work.
Yeah.
That puts you in a position to really show up in a way that you can be compassionate, and you can be generous, and you can be kind, and you can look for the similarities and the commonalities by and between people. That's additive rather than in a very binary, subtractive kind of way.
Quote, I'll send it, there's a quote from Nelson Mandela. I don't know if you ever saw it. He's in prison, and he's writing to somebody else who's about to go into prison. And he talks about his meditation practice that does just what you described. That as an activist, he saw his role was to be able to bring a different energy and different relationship to the people who are imprisoning him, as a way of freeing everybody. And that he felt that his daily meditation practice allowed him to do that. And so I feel like there is a lineage here of people who are able to do both well, and that those who can seem to have the greatest impact.
Yeah, they can be transcendent, because imagine that you're in a room, to paraphrase Hamilton, the room where it happens, and there are very few people there in that room, and all of a sudden emotion, different thoughts, different assessments of people pop up, and they can become blinders, to then focusing on what is true north, to focus on what is the reason why we are here. It isn't personal gain, but that requires the work to, when that ego and pride and vanity arises, to note it and say, not now. I know you're there, but not now. This is not why we do the work we do. And the transcendent leaders, the ones who embody that leadership, are not removed from these emotions and these sensations, but they're the ones who have over years and years and years developed the capacity to deal with it. In our training programs for young leaders at the Obama Foundation, the thing that I spend most time when I have the beautiful opportunity to talk to them is about the inner work, is about why are you leading? Why do you do the work that you do? What happens in that moment where you become enamored of the press clippings? When you're on stage and it feels good? When decisions maybe begin to be obscured by, not by the true north, but by a different thought or a different idea that's rooted on something else. It'll happen. It'll happen to everyone. It'll pop up. You're not immune to it. You're human. So how do you then prepare yourself? How do you train for it? This is an accident. You don't back into it. You train for it. Because in that expression of leadership, where one of my favorite Barack Obama answers to a group of interns at the White House when they asked him about the success, it's like there'll be the kid who will raise his or her hand, and essentially the question is, how do I become president? Never that direct, sometimes, but rarely that direct. And he would always pivot to, don't tell me what you want to do, tell me why you want to do it. Tell me what is driving that passion. What is the good that you want to do? And then how can you be more useful? He says that, and I'm paraphrasing the former president, where he says that his mother gave him a bit of advice that there were two things you needed to do. You needed to be useful and you needed to be good. In terms of being good, treat people with kindness, with respect, with dignity, with the worth that every single person has, even if they disagree with you completely and you disagree with them. And then be useful. In what you do. How can you do the most good for the most people and add value to whatever you're doing, right? And that's not like a 12-step executive leadership program, but those are two good foundations to build upon. Be good and be useful. You can go a long way from there.
I'm curious, one last question, David. If you had to best understand, if somebody asked you, all right, what is your kind of core purpose? What is it that you feel like kind of uniquely brought you into this life and into this body and into this mind and into this thing? Is there an answer you have, or is that still kind of in exploration? If somebody's like, all right, David, what is your core guiding purpose or guiding kind of principle that regardless of whether you're in the White House, not in the White House, raising your kids, meeting a janitor in this place, do you have a sense of that? Are there words that go to that?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that we, I think, wrestle with our entire life. But the more I have reflected on this, it's Soren, I have been so lucky to walk into the White House to serve the American people as the son of two Portuguese immigrants, growing up in a small blue-collar factory town in southeastern Massachusetts around thousands upon thousands of immigrants like that. And to be able to do that work every day, if I can devote the rest of my life, and no matter what I do, but the why being, how can I pay it forward? How can I open up as many doors for as many young people and for just people in general in a way that is helpful to them, that is useful to them, that makes their lives better because of what I have been given. I sometimes with our leaders and with others, when I try to track back and to say, okay, how did I end up there? And Soren, every time was because I had developed a relationship with someone where we were doing good work together, but also we had a good sense of who we were as people.
Mm-hmm.
And those people open doors, those people make a connection, those people lift you up and don't ask for anything in return. There's never been an instance where a mentor or someone who opened a door, ever came back and said, "Hey, could you do this for me now?" Like, no.
Mm-hmm.
It was this beautiful joy in being able to say, well, how about that? May this connection and their only request is that you pay it forward.
Yeah.
That you don't, as Michelle Obama says, you climb that ladder. And what you don't do is you don't pull up the ladder after you've gotten to where you want to be. You put your hand back and you continue to help people climb their own ladders. And that's the North Star.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and it's that me and the we. It's like there's the me, and then can we remember the we? But that's beautiful. David, it's an honor. I so appreciate your time. I so appreciate your insights. I so appreciate your devotion to the inner and the outer worlds. And just thank you so much for joining us and taking the time.
Soren, and I should have said this at the beginning, but the service that you have provided to millions of people through the pandemic, especially, but even before, but the fact that for weeks upon weeks upon weeks and day after day after day, in a moment where people were isolated and suffering and dealing with the depths of anguish and death and sickness and illness, that there was this oasis every day, that the space that you created for you and to John to be a lifeline to people in ways that you can't begin to imagine or assess. And it doesn't matter, but you should know that made the world a little bit better for a lot of people. And so thank you for what you have done and what you continue to do.
Thank you. Well, it's like you said, David, it's interesting to feel of use is such a great feeling, like
it's pretty cool.
You actually feel like you have something that impacts somebody else. And I think that to me is underestimated. We should have a GDP on usefulness or the Forbes 500 list of usefulness. So
that's pretty good.
So thank you for that. But there is that sense of like usefulness, like, wow, there's something I have that somebody can benefit from is such it's such, or I can receive, which I've received so much. So just to be in that dance, I feel like it's such a gift. And so thank you for dancing in that realm with me.
Until we dance again.
Yeah.